All right, how's everybody doing out there today? Welcome to my channel, and this is an educational channel that's focused on looking at what I consider to be important theories of everything, ancient or modern, um, all-encompassing ways of looking at the world around us that could benefit our um, holistic view of things if we knew about them. Most of them are pretty obscure and somewhat esoteric, and maybe people might need a little bit of a holding hand to access them. Um, and today is our 369th video that we've done on Dewey B. Larson and his reciprocal system of theory. And Mr. Larson lived in the 20th century in the U.S., mostly out west, especially in the Portland area. And around 1930, he had some experiences that gave him some novel ideas about the universe. And he developed his thinking to the point where he came out with his two fundamental postulates in 1959. And then from those postulates, he developed a theoretical universe about what the universe would look like if his postulates were correct. And from there, he compared his theoretical universe with the actual universe that the scientists had measured in their laboratories and experiments. And it's a very interesting study because Larson was able to kind of recreate many of the laboratory measurements that the scientists made just from theory. So he didn't need a multi-million-dollar telescope or particle accelerators or anything like that to be able to make some of his findings. Just right out of his head. Okay, now Larson died in 1990, and there are a few of his followers who have gone on to revise his work in certain ways. Hopefully keeping within the spirit of the reciprocal system. Larson recognized that he was prone to make some mistakes in his derivations. He believed that his theory itself was correct, but whether he applied it correctly in all cases was a different matter. And Dr. Bruce Perret is one of those people. And Dr. Perret wrote many articles and had a few different websites, forums on websites that he discussed the reciprocal system and other things as well. Now, when he writes under his own name, those are mainly articles that are kind of more in the vein of the reciprocal system. When he writes under the name Daniel Phoenix 3, those are more speculative articles that do contain some reciprocal system content, but maybe are a little bit off the beaten path, meandering into topics that maybe Mr. Larson wouldn't have really gotten into himself, and taking some liberties maybe with the theory and moving into areas that that Dr. Perret was more interested in. Things like Jungian psychology, Taoist theory, computer imaging, science fiction, language and linguistics. So today we're looking, and a lot of times Dr. Perret or Daniel uses both of them actually use some Flintstones imagery. So This article that we're looking at today is called "Where's the Kaboom?" There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom. And I believe that was Kazoo from the Flintstones, that black character with the green, the little black character with the green helmet. Now, basically, just to get into the reciprocal system just a tad, the two fundamental postulates of Larson. The first one is by far the more important, and we'll stay with that one for today. The universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. Okay, so that's Larson's universe, a universe made out of motion, not matter, not energy, but motion. And motion, other people have had that idea before, but they never really made it work because they didn't define motion, redefine motion. Larson redefines motion as the relationship between space and time. We can see that in the most basic aspect of motion, which is speed. Speed is space divided by time. The bicycle is moving 14 miles per hour. 14 miles of space and 1 hour of time, space over time. But all other scientific quantities as well turn out to be relationships between space and time. And space and time both have motion in Larson's world is really what you would call a scalar motion, not a vectorial motion, not the kind of motion that we're accustomed to, but a scalar motion, a motion that has a magnitude but has no specific direction. And you envision this using a balloon with dots on it. If you blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other, but in no specific direction. It's what Larson calls clock time and clock space. The clock is always getting later and later and later, but it's not getting later in any particular direction. And space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart, just like dots on the balloon, but in no specific direction. And then there's also coordinate time and coordinate space. That's the 3-dimensionality of time and space. We can see that space is generally 3-dimensional, XYZ coordinates or volume. But because of the reciprocal postulate between space and time, that also means that time is 3-dimensional, as all reciprocals have identical qualities, except that they're just in reverse order, such as the reciprocal 3. The reciprocal of 3 is 1/3, 3 over 1 or 1 over 3. They are identical in quality, but just different in order. And then space and time both come in discrete units only. There's a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. If you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have the speed of light, which is what Larson calls unit speed. And this is the fundamental motion of the universe, outward in all directions at the speed of light. And Larson refers to this as the progression of the natural reference system. This is basically the state of rest in the reciprocal system. And then Larson goes from there and builds out his whole theoretical universe. I went through this in about 15 videos that I did maybe 10 or 11 months ago, called The Outline of the Deductive Development of the Reciprocal System, where he goes step by step, 165 steps, to go from his postulates to the end of his theoretical universe. So you might want to check that out. Right now we're going to get into Daniel, Where's the Kaboom? Last June on the Antiquitas Forum, which is one of Peret's forums, that he's deceased now, but back when he was alive, there was an interesting discussion on nuclear weapons concerning if the nuclear tests had actually been faked by the major governments. I've done contract work for nuclear power plants, so I've seen nuclear power in action. But making lots of hot water from atomic fission is not the same as a nuclear explosion. The question arose in response to a paper put out by Miles Mathis titled "The Bikini Atoll Nuclear Tests Were Faked," which went on to demonstrate through publicly available records the many inconsistencies in the tests. My analysis described how nuclear fission works in the reciprocal system, which has a different structure to the atom. Chain reactions are based on the atom being composed of protons and neutrons, where the impact of one neutron kicks out two others to cause the cascade. Though the number of neutrons would double, each would have only half the energy of the one impacting the nucleus, which means neither of those emitted neutrons will probably have enough energy to repeat the process. But we do have nuclear reactions that work in the reciprocal system because the model is different. The reciprocal system model has temporal rotations as its basis, the displacement being the number of protons, but no neutrons, which are particles composed of a proton plus an antineutrino. No antineutrinos in the atomic rotating system, as they would be spatially displaced in a temporal rotation. Space to time constitutes motion, so they would just move through the atoms like electric current. But the atom does have charged electron neutrinos present, which is the value we use for the atomic mass unit. The proton has displacements of 1, 1, negative 1, and the neutrino of 1 half, 1 half, negative 1. So you can see that the proton is equivalent to 2 neutrino rotations, which leads Larson to Larson's mass formula of 2Z plus G, twice the atomic number, the temporal displacement, plus the number of captured neutrinos, G. So when you destroy an atom, you are converting some of the atomic rotation to linear status as kinetic energy. The drop in rotational speed means some of the captured neutrinos get set free and are carried away at the speed of light to end up getting trapped in another atomic rotation, increasing its mass past the isotopic limit, causing it to convert some of its atomic rotation to linear status to get rid of the excess speed, liberating some more neutrinos. And the chain reaction runs for quite some time, since all the heavy elements like uranium are right on the threshold of the isotopic limit. But this chain reaction is a relatively slow process that moves through the atoms, much like the magnetic version of heat. You don't have a nuclear explosion, but nuclear combustion. I realize that for most people, that explanation makes about as much sense as a Bronto crane visiting a cavern on the green for dinner. But you don't need to be Albert Einstein to realize that nature's version of a thermonuclear combustion is a star, and a thermonuclear explosion is a supernova. For nature to create that earth-shattering kaboom, you need a stellar-sized mass, not a chunk of material the size of a basketball. So why bother to fake it? In my own research into the mythology of the gods with a small g, I have run across many references that indicate that those gods, the Dingar, also known as the Anunnaki or Olympians, were arms dealers, mining the resources of our world and making use of the human slave populations to build and stockpile weapons, much like their descendants today, like father, like son. And that included nuclear weapons. But when that sibling rivalry between Enlil and Enki got to the point of war, they used them on each other, leaving some nice radioactive bald spots of smooth, fused green glass on the planet. So it appears that these gods had functioning nuclear weapons, and for some reason, humanity has been unable to duplicate it in the modern era, if the evidence of faked nuclear testing is true. I believe it is true, and I'll tell you why. Back in my early days of subcontracting for the aircraft industry, I was involved with a project to reverse engineer what appeared to be a reactor core and anti-gravity propulsion system from a foreign device. The elements at its core were stable transuranium uranium elements, later identified as element number 115 by Bob Lazar. These reactors ran cold, unlike our superheating nuclear reactors. It only became dangerous when the warp core, as we called it, was shut down through accident, mishap, or pressing the big red button. Once the internal reaction ceased, the core became highly radioactive and would proceed into a nuclear meltdown again. Lots of heat, but no earth-shattering kaboom. Back then, we did not have a clue as to what was going on, nor how anyone could have gotten the material in the core and began the process without rapidly decaying into radioactive dust. 20 years later, thanks to some research put out by Dewey Larson that described magnetic ionization of atoms and how isotopic mass inverted when matter was accelerated past the speed of light, we were able to understand how these warp cores worked and what was needed to make an environment with a zero magnetic ionization level. With no magnetic ionization, all of the 117 elements defined in the reciprocal system's periodic table are stable, only becoming unstable when the magnetic ionization is raised to 1 or more. These cores had to have been built in space, not on a planet that has magnetic ionization levels of unity or higher. And that gave an interesting clue as to why nuclear explosions worked for the gods of old, but probably aren't working today. Our current magnetic ionization is about 1 natural unit. Using Larson's equation, that means all the elements from 92 on up will exhibit radioactive decay. But that wasn't always the case. Back in the 1500s, the Earth underwent an expansion event, where the size of the planet increases slightly, well, in that case, about 5,000 miles in circumference, which I explain in detail in in my article, The Colonization of Tiamat, Part 5, which I hope he put that out. I'm not sure that I've seen that. I've seen the first 4. This moves some continents around a bit and adds more ocean floor. But most importantly, the expansion events normally coincide with a decrease in magnetic ionization level. So prior to the 16th century, the Earth had a level of 2, making gold the uranium of the day, and why the gods went after it, or were after it. And if you read, like Zachariah Sitchin or whatever, the whole idea behind the Anunnaki coming here was to mine gold. Uranium-236 and other elements near the 236 atomic mass unit boundary are at their age limit, as Larson describes it in his books. In other words, they have accumulated as much isotopic mass as they can handle without falling apart. In the reciprocal system, there are two ways for an atom to fall apart, which also describe the two different types of supernova explosions witnessed by astronomers. The first is the thermal limit, where things just get too hot and explode to release the heat. For example, the blue giant stars, which are old stars, not young ones, in the reciprocal system. The second is the age limit, where the vibrational mass exceeds the rotational mass, causing the more violent age limit detonation, as seen in other supernova. Age limit can occur at any time, since all it requires is some very old, heavy rocks. The thermal limit, however, requires a lot of rocks of younger age, hence the first generation blue supergiant stars. This difference explains the nuclear weapon inconsistency between the days of the gods and today. With our current radioactive materials, they simply cannot get hot enough to supernova because the age limit explosion will occur first, destroying the atom before the reaction can really get going. In the past, when gold was the radioactive fuel of choice, the gold atoms had plenty of room to get good and hot and cross the thermal limit on a small scale, making a less hot but much faster burning reaction, an explosion. Like most fuels, the hotter it burns, the faster it is consumed, and fast consumption is required to produce the pressure necessary for the best bang since the big one. But what of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Well, if there were no nukes, then there is only one obvious conclusion. Certain factions of the Japanese government and military conspired with the United States to fake the explosions, seeding the area with large quantities of high explosives, which the aircraft set off with their bombs, giving the huge flame show now documented as a nuclear detonation. And if you look at the post-nuke consequences, one could not help but notice that the globally expanding Japanese empire came to a halt after that. There is a lot here that says Project Bluebeam. I submit for your perusal this army photo of a soldier pointing at ground zero, the point directly below where the nuclear bomb went off. Notice the extensive amount of radiation gear, including respirator and air tanks, he used to keep from being killed by the now abundant radioactive fallout. Hey, wait a second. So there you have it. We have in our collective race memory the images of the gods making cities and turning people into pillars of salt using the power of gold, and why gold is associated with power. Our unconscious knows it can be done, even though it can no longer be done in our current magnetic environment. Enter the people that want power and control over the planet. What better hostage could they have than the world itself under the threat of nuclear destruction? As long as they could prey on those unconscious memories and make people believe they could do it with a lot of special effects, well, then you now control the biggest threat to life on the planet. In closing, I would like you to ask yourself, if these devices actually worked, why would governments who are all paranoid over national security put out so much information on how nuclear weapons work that a high school student could build one? One would think that their principle of operation would be one of the biggest kept secrets on the planet. People will make any sacrifice, life, liberty, or happiness for the security of a global government regulating possible nuclear destruction. Okay, that's the end of the article. Now, the picture in question here, which I was a bit confused about, but the photo of a soldier pointing at ground zero, the guy's not wearing any type of protective equipment whatsoever. He's wearing like a suit, a sport coat, and no helmet or anything. So I guess that was the point that he was making. I don't know about this article. I don't know whether nuclear, is fake or not. But I know that a whole lot of other stuff is fake. So I think this is definitely a possibility. The main reason that I'm looking at this article, though, is just to show you that the reciprocal system can be how it can be used. You can use it to apply it to a whole lot of stuff. Once you understand how the theory works, then you can use it. Because it gives you a different way of understanding the atom, for example, understanding explosions, stellar explosions, galactic explosions, isotopic radioactivity, and all of that different stuff. And so you can use it to answer questions about history and to answer wide-ranging questions about all kinds of secret stuff that other people are a bit confused about. Tomorrow, I'm going to try to also. Perret has a similar article about space travel that we'll be looking at. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for tuning in today, and hope to see you tomorrow, and have a great day.